My name is Malin Prescott, and if you knew my parents, you'd understand why they'd say I was their biggest mistake. Sometimes I wonder if they rehearsed that line in front of the mirror, savoring the words on their tongues before launching them at me like a sharpened dart. I was 12 the first time I heard it. My mother's lips pinched, my father's eyes glazed with that cocktail of disappointment and scorn that would become my inheritance. I grew up in the North Yorkshire countryside, a place where rolling fields hide the wounds that families bury in the soil. My sister, Eloise, was the golden child. If you looked up the definition of perfect daughter, you'd find her photo smiling back at you. Porcelain skin, eyes like rain-washed glass, a laugh that made the whole room lean in to listen. Next to her, I was an oil stain on a silk dress, impossible to ignore, impossible to love. Dad ran a small law firm in town, the kind that handled wills and divorces and kept local secrets tucked away in leather folders. Mom kept the house in a constant state of curated beauty, hydrangeas blooming by the door, the smell of fresh polish on antique floors, the faintest trace of lavender drifting through the halls. Their world was a glass box. I was the crack they tried to tape shut. When I was 16, I stopped trying to be the daughter they wanted. I'd come home from school and walk straight past Mom's frozen smile, up the stairs to my room that felt more like an attic than a sanctuary. I'd put on my headphones and drown out the arguments, the sideways looks, the whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. I studied hard, not because they told me to, but because I wanted out of that house, out of their line of fire, out of being their biggest mistake. I moved to London when I was 18, scraping by with a half scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. I didn't come back much. Eloise did. She was studying medicine and had a boyfriend who was the sort of boy you introduce at dinner parties and whisper about in the kitchen. Mom and Dad would beam at her across the table, raising glasses to her accomplishments, her wedding plans, her life that gleamed with the promise I never had. I think I always knew my parents' love was conditional, but when you're standing on the outside, looking in through the window, you convince yourself that one day they'll crack the door open. One day they'll see you, really see you. Turns out, sometimes the door stays shut. It was a rainy Thursday when I got the call. I was in the middle of stocking shelves at the tiny bookstore where I worked to pay the bills my office job couldn't cover. My phone buzzed and I almost ignored it, but something, maybe that old ghost of a daughter desperate to belong, made me answer. Malin? It was Mom's voice, taut like a string about to snap. What is it? I didn't bother with pleasantries. She only called when she needed something. It's Eloise. She's sick. The doctors say it's serious. Kidney failure. They need to test the family for a match. I sat on the bookstore's dusty floor, my back against a shelf of second-hand romance novels, and I swear I could feel the universe twisting something cruel into my chest. After 25 years of being the mistake, I was suddenly necessary. Are you asking me to come back? I asked. Of course you have to come back, Mom snapped. You're her sister. Don't make this about you. It's funny how you can hate someone and still hope they'll beg you to come home, just once. But she didn't. They didn't. I bought a train ticket that night, packed a duffel bag with more resentment than clothes, and stared out the window all the way to Yorkshire, my reflection staring back at me like a question I didn't know how to answer. When I walked through the front door of my childhood home, it felt exactly the same. The hydrangeas were blooming, the floors were polished, and the scent of lavender wrapped around my throat like a noose. Eloise was upstairs in her old room, the one they'd kept like a shrine, propped up on pillows, her skin as pale as the sheets that cocooned her. She looked smaller than I remembered, the edges of her perfection dulled by tubes and machines. She smiled when she saw me. May? She breathed, like we were kids again, like she hadn't watched me walk out the door and never once asked me to stay. Hey, Elo, I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. Heard you're giving the family a scare. Her laugh was thin, but it was there. You always make it sound so easy. Last winter, I decided to do something I'd always promised myself I would. I launched a foundation, not just for the photos and the handshakes, but because I knew how it felt to stand in the rain waiting for the bus, pockets empty. The first big project was a charity gala. I didn't slap my name across it. I wanted it to shine on its own merit. Quiet power. That's always been my style. I hired an assistant, Freya. Whip-smart, tireless. The kind of person who makes you believe the impossible is just a to-do list waiting to be ticked off. She booked the venue, the catering, the guest list. Clarissa's name came up, of course. She's a socialite now, which is a fancy word for good at parties. Freya thought it would be a good look to invite her. I didn't argue. 2 nights before the gala, I sat in my office, feet propped up on a box of unused invites, a half-drunk cup of cold tea beside me. Freya called. "Lore, you won't believe what I just heard," she said, voice crackling over the line. "Clarissa was out with her circle tonight. She told them you're broke, that you're just the face for someone else's money." I laughed, an ugly cracked sound that didn't feel like mine. "Of course she did," I murmured. "Of course she did." The next day, I put on my best suit, black, tailored, sharp enough to draw blood. I walked into Clarissa's world, a cafe in the city center, all white marble tables and soft jazz humming through the air. She was already there, fingers tapping across her phone screen, her blonde hair pulled into that perfect chignon she's been wearing since 6th form. She looked up when she saw me, smiled. "Lorelei, I wasn't expecting you." "No," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "You never do." She tilted her head, that perfect smile still in place. "Everything all right? You look intense." "Did you tell them?" I asked, my voice calm but every word a hammer. "Did you tell them I'm poor? That I'm just a puppet for someone else's money?" She shrugged, stirring her coffee. "Oh, that. Lorelei, you know how people talk. They asked, and I made a joke. You shouldn't take it so seriously." I wanted to throw the table over, to scream the years of swallowed pride into her perfect face. But I didn't. Shadows know better than to cast themselves over the light. So I leaned forward, close enough for her to see the truth she'd always refused to look at. "Tomorrow night," I said, "when you walk into that ballroom, remember this. I paid for every glass of champagne, every string quartet note, every flower on every table. Me. Not a board of old men, not a husband with a trust fund. Me." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said. "I think I'm finally enough for myself. And that's what scares you, Clarissa." I stood up before she could answer, my hands steady, even though my heart was thrashing like a storm under my ribs. As I pushed through the cafe doors, my phone buzzed. A message from Freya. "Just wanted to say you're going to be magnificent tomorrow." For the first time in years, I believed it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I didn't sleep the night before the surgery. The house was too still, too heavy with the weight of a family trying to pretend it wasn't breaking. I lay on my childhood bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling as a kid, remembering how I'd wish on them to take me far away. Now here I was, back in the place I'd spent years trying to escape, about to give away a piece of myself for a sister who'd been the sun to my shadow. I padded down the hallway, every floorboard groaning like it remembered every argument, every slammed door. I stopped outside Eloise's room. The door was cracked open, the soft hum of the medical machines weaving through the silence. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, her hair fanned out on the pillow like a halo that had lost its shine. She turned her head when she heard me. "May? Can't sleep?" I whispered. She laughed, a sound so fragile it felt like glass. "What's your excuse?" I shrugged and walked in, sitting on the chair by her bed. "Figured I'd keep you company." She reached for my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. "Do you hate me?" I wanted to lie, to tell her I didn't, but the truth pressed against my ribs. "Some days," I said softly, "some days I do, but not enough to walk away." A tear slid down her cheek. "You were always stronger than me." "No," I said, brushing the tear away with my thumb. "I just learned to survive you all." We sat there in silence, our hands knotted together, the machines beeping their lullaby. I wondered if she felt the same fear I did. The fear that this wouldn't fix anything, that our family would go back to pretending once they got what they needed. Maybe that was what hurt the most. Knowing I'd never be more than a bandage on their perfect picture. When dawn crept in, pale and hesitant, Mom appeared in the doorway. She looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights. For a second, I saw a glimpse of the mother I used to imagine, the one who would pull me close and tell me I wasn't a mistake. But she didn't. She just cleared her throat and said, "The car's ready." The hospital smelled like bleach and worry. I changed into a paper gown, the fabric crinkling like dry leaves with every move. A nurse with kind eyes and gentle hands explained the procedure, but her words drifted past me like smoke. All I could focus on was the cold bite of the IV, the soft beep of the monitor tracking my heart as if it was afraid it might run away. Dad stood in the corner of the pre-op room, arms folded, jaw clenched. He didn't speak, but his eyes said enough. Do this. Fix her. Be useful for once. Eloise came in on a gurney, her face pale but her smile brave. She reached for my hand again, squeezing it so tight I felt my bones grind. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." I wanted to say, "Don't thank me." I wanted to say, "Fight for me the way I'm fighting for you." But the words stuck to my tongue like glue. So I just squeezed back and let the nurses wheel us away. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under was the bright surgical lights, sterile and unforgiving. I wondered if they'd burn away all the ugly parts of our family, all the years of resentment and hurt. I wondered if I'd wake up different. When I opened my eyes again, it felt like surfacing from deep water, gasping, disoriented, my body heavy with the ache of something missing. Pain throbbed through my side, sharp and insistent, but it was the emptiness that rattled me. I'd given up a part of myself, and the hole it left was more than just physical. Mom was there when I woke up. She perched on the edge of the chair like she was afraid to touch me, her hands twisting the strap of her handbag. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice brittle. "Like someone stole a piece of me," I croaked. She flinched, eyes darting away. "Eloise is stable. The doctors say it went well." "Good for her," I said, closing my eyes. I couldn't bear to look at her. This woman who'd spent my whole life reminding me I was their greatest regret, now sitting vigil like she'd earned the right. Recovery was a slow, bitter climb. Every step I took felt like a reminder of what I'd given up, what I'd sacrificed for people who couldn't say thank you without choking on it. Eloise's room was filled with flowers and cards, and the gentle buzz of visitors cooing over her bravery. My room was quiet, the only sound my own thoughts echoing off the sterile walls. One evening, when the pain was at its worst, Eloise appeared at my door, leaning on a nurse for support. She shuffled in, her IV pole rattling like a chain she couldn't shake. "You shouldn't be up," I said, sitting up as best I could. She smiled, that soft, tired smile that made me remember the girls we used to be, before resentment and envy built walls between us. "I wanted to see you." She sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "May, I don't deserve you." "No," I said, my voice cracking. "You don't. But here we are." She laughed, but it broke in the middle, turning into a sob. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for not standing up for you, for letting them treat you like this." I wanted to hate her in that moment. I wanted to pull away, to protect what little was left of me. But I couldn't. Because under all the hurt, she was still my sister, and maybe, just maybe, we could stitch something back together from the ruins. "Rest," I said, brushing her hair back from her face. "Get better. That's all that matters now." She squeezed my hand, and for a moment it felt like we were kids again, sneaking midnight snacks and whispering secrets under blankets. But when she left, the emptiness returned, louder than before. Mom and Dad didn't visit much after that. Once Eloise was on the mend, their attention shifted back to the life they'd curated, the spotless image they'd always protected. I was an afterthought again. The mistake they'd needed for a moment, now conveniently tucked away. When the hospital finally released me, I packed my bag slowly, Every folded shirt, a reminder that I was heading back to a life I'd never fully escaped. Eloise hugged me at the door, her arms gentle around my still healing side. "I'll call," she promised. "I'll visit. I'll make this right." "Don't promise things you can't keep," I said softly. But I let her hold me anyway. Mom and Dad drove me to the station in stiff silence. The car smelled like the lavender sachets. Mom kept in every crevice of the house, a scent that always made me feel trapped. At the platform, Mom kissed my cheek like a stranger, her lips barely brushing my skin. Dad offered a nod, the closest thing to gratitude I'd ever get. As the train pulled away, I watched their figures blur into the countryside. I pressed my forehead to the window and felt the weight of my own heartbeat, strong and steady despite everything they'd taken. Back in London, my flat felt like freedom and loneliness all tangled up in one. The pain faded, but the scar remained. A reminder that even when you give everything, some people will never see you as enough. But I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I'd given Eloise a second chance, and maybe, just maybe, I'd given myself one too. I looked in the mirror that night, tracing the thin line that curved along my side. "You're not their mistake," I whispered to my reflection. "You're your own miracle." And for the first time in my life, I almost believed it. When the train rattled into London that night, the city lights blinking like winks from a world that hadn't judged me yet, I felt as hollow as the tunnels we passed through. My side ached with every step, the painkiller prescription in my bag crumpled next to my train ticket. I told myself I'd never use it, that I'd face this hurt, raw and honest, the way I'd faced every cold truth my parents had thrown at me. My flat was exactly as I'd left it. The peeling paint on the windowsill, the crooked bookshelf that threatened to collapse every time I walked too close, the kettle that whined louder than a train horn when it boiled. I dropped my bag by the door and leaned against the wall, letting the musty scent of old books and my own solitude fill my lungs. That night, I lay awake tracing the scar under my shirt. It wasn't just a mark of what I'd given Eloise, it was a line dividing who I'd been from who I might become. I thought about my sister lying in that hospital bed, her new kidney humming away, a piece of me working to keep her alive. I wondered if she'd keep her promise to call, to visit, to fix what our parents had broken between us. Weeks slipped by like damp pages in the rain. I went back to the bookshop, stocking shelves for customers who barely noticed me. My manager, Liz, was the only one who looked twice. "You all right, May? You look pale," she'd say. But I'd brush her off with a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Just tired," I'd lie. "Long few weeks." Eloise called sometimes. Her voice was brighter than it had been in months, full of a hope I both admired and envied. "Come visit," she'd say. "Mom and Dad have been asking about you." I'd laugh into the receiver. "Have they now?" It always came out sharper than I intended. She'd pause, the silence carrying more than either of us knew how to say. One Saturday, a letter arrived in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Mom's neat, tight loops, each word pressed into the paper like she was trying to keep it from escaping. It was short. "We hope you're well. Eloise is doing better every day. Perhaps you can visit for her birthday. It would mean a lot to her. No, thank you. No, we miss you." Just a request, wrapped in the same cold civility they'd always shown me. I crumpled it into a ball and tossed it at the bin, missing by a mile. The letter sat there on my floor like a ghost, reminding me I was never more than what they needed me to be. A week later, Eloise showed up at my door. She looked tired but healthier. Her skin had a flush I hadn't seen in months. She carried a bag of pastries from the bakery around the corner, her peace offering wrapped in brown paper and ribbon. "Don't you knock anymore?" I asked, folding my arms across my chest. She shrugged, pushing past me into the flat. "You never answer when I do." We sat on my battered sofa, eating almond croissants and drinking tea that tasted more like metal than comfort. She looked around at my tiny living room, her eyes softening at the stacks of books, the faded curtains I'd rescued from a charity shop. "It's cozy," she said. "It's mine," I corrected. She set her cup down, her fingers tracing the rim. "Mom's planning a big thing for my birthday. She wants you there." "Does she? Or do you?" I asked, and immediately regretted the bite in my voice. She flinched, then smiled, that too sweet smile that never fooled me. Both. May, it would mean a lot. I stared out the window, the city bustling beyond the glass like a life I could almost touch. I don't know, Elo. I gave you my kidney. Isn't that enough family duty for a lifetime? Her eyes glistened, but she didn't wipe the tears away. I want you there. I want people to see us together. Maybe things can be different now. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the scar under my shirt itched, reminding me that some wounds don't close just because you stitch them up. I agreed, in the end, because that's what I did. I showed up, even when it hurt, even when it felt like pulling out splinters one by one. Her birthday party was exactly as I'd pictured it. Our parents' house scrubbed to a shine, the garden lit with fairy lights, a buffet that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Eloise floated through the guests like a princess at her coronation, all radiant smiles and gentle hugs. Every so often, her eyes would flick to me. Standing by the fence nursing a glass of warm wine, the prodigal sister propped up like an inconvenient prop. People stared. They whispered, "Is that Maylan? The other daughter? Didn't she?" I felt their eyes crawl over me like ants. But I stayed. For Eloise. Mom cornered me by the buffet table. "You could have worn something nicer," she hissed. Her lips stretched into a smile for the benefit of the people behind her. "I did," I said, tugging at the hem of my simple black dress. "It just doesn't come with an apology." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't push. She never did in public. Image was everything. Later, Eloise dragged me onto the patio, her cheeks pink from laughter and too much champagne. "Dance with me," she begged. "Please, May. Just once." So I danced with her, my sister who'd been the center of their universe. My sister who now held a piece of me inside her. We twirled under the fairy lights, our feet stumbling over cracked stones and old memories. For a moment, I forgot the way they'd made me feel, forgot the sharp edges of our past. For a moment, it was just us. But moments end. Always. I went to find the bathroom to catch my breath. As I passed the study, I heard Dad's voice. I paused. He was on the phone, the door cracked just enough. "Of course she did it," he was saying. "She'd do anything to feel needed. Maylin's always been useful when she wants to be." I pressed my palm to my chest, the scar under my dress burning like a brand. Useful. That was all I'd ever been. I left the party without saying goodbye. I walked through the garden, past the hydrangeas and the guests who didn't notice I'd slipped away. Back on the train, I stared at my reflection in the window, a girl who'd given up pieces of herself like spare change, hoping someone would tell her she was worth keeping. When I got home, there was a message from Eloise waiting on my phone. "Where did you go? I looked everywhere. Please come back." But I didn't answer. I curled up on my bed, the city's hum in my ears, and I promised myself I'd stop giving away pieces I couldn't get back. Days turned to weeks again. Eloise called, left voicemails. Mom sent another letter, stiff and formal, asking me to, quote, "consider family unity." I didn't respond. I went to work, stocked shelves, counted out my hours like coins I couldn't afford to spend. Then, one night, there was a knock at my door. Not Eloise. Not Mum. It was Dad. He stood there in his tailored coat, his eyes dark and sunken. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. He looked past me into the flat, as if searching for something he could understand. "Your sister needs you," he said. "Again?" I laughed, bitter as bile. "What now?" His shoulders sagged, the weight of our history pressing him down. "She's sick again. There are complications. The doctors, they need you to come." I felt the walls I'd built quake under the force of those words. "And if I say no?" He looked at me then. Really looked. Like he hadn't since I was a child desperate for his praise. "Please, Maylin," he whispered. "Please." I stood there, the air between us thick with years of silence and shame. I felt the scar under my shirt pulse like a second heartbeat. And I realized, in that moment, that sometimes the hardest thing in the world isn't giving yourself away, it's deciding when to stop. And I hadn't decided yet. Dad's eyes followed me as I stepped back into the living room, his silhouette framed by the weak light spilling through the window. He didn't move, he didn't speak. Maybe he thought his silence was still power, a reminder that I'd always come when they called. But the old echoes didn't hold the same sway they used to. I wrapped my arms around myself, pressing my palms flat against the scar beneath my ribs, as if I could hold my boundaries in place. "What's wrong with her?" I asked, my voice calm but hollow. Dad cleared his throat. "There's been rejection. The doctors say her body isn't adjusting to the new medication. They're doing everything they can, but—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I knew enough about kidneys now, more than I'd ever wanted to know, to read between the lines. My mind replayed the months I'd spent healing, the ache of each step, the nights I'd lain awake feeling the phantom tug of something I'd given away. And now they wanted more. More of me. More of what I'd never get back. "And you think I can fix this?" I asked. Dad flinched, but he didn't look away. "You could be there for her, help her through this. Maybe they'll need more tests, more samples. The doctors aren't sure yet." I almost laughed. More tests, more blood, more of me until there was nothing left to scrape from the bottom of my bones. I turned away from him, pacing the worn carpet, the fibers catching on the hem of my sock. "Why do you always come to me when you've run out of options?" I whispered. "Why is it my job to patch up every crack in this family?" Dad shifted his weight, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "You're her sister, Malin. Your family." Family. I spat the word like it was poison. "Where was that family when you told me I was your biggest mistake? When you let Mom turn me into the scapegoat for every disappointment you ever had? Where was that family when I needed someone to fight for me?" He looked at the floor, the shadows deepening the lines on his face. "You're not a mistake," he murmured, but the words sounded brittle, half-swallowed. We didn't know how to—" "How to what?" I snapped. "How to love me. How to make room for more than one daughter who mattered." Silence pressed between us, thick and suffocating. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not for him. Not for this. Dad took a step forward, then stopped, his shoulders slumping. "Please, she needs you." I thought about Eloise, my sister who'd been the sun while I spun lonely orbits in her shadow. My sister, who had my kidney humming under her ribs like a reminder of everything I'd given up. She'd said she'd fix things. She'd promised she'd make it right. But people don't change because they promise you they will. They change when they realize they can't keep taking without giving something back. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But don't come here again like this. If she wants me, she can ask. Not you. Not Mom, her." Dad's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. He nodded once, stiff, formal, and walked to the door. Before he left, he paused, his hand hovering over the knob. "You're not a mistake, Malin," he said, so soft I almost didn't hear it. Then he was gone. I stood in the silence he left behind, the air in my flat thick with unspoken truths. I pressed my forehead to the window, the city beyond a blur of streetlights and neon signs. Somewhere out there, people were building lives that didn't hinge on scars and sacrifice. I wondered what that felt like. The next morning, Eloise called. Her voice cracked around the edges, raw and exhausted. "May, I'm sorry. I didn't want Dad to come. He's desperate." "You should have called me yourself," I said. "Isn't that what you promised?" A pause, then a broken laugh. "I know, I'm trying. It's all happening so fast." "What do you need?" I asked, though the question tasted like iron on my tongue. She hesitated. "Just you. I need you here. I don't know how to do this alone." A part of me wanted to tell her I'd already done my part, that I'd already given her more than anyone had ever given me. But another part, the part that still remembered blanket forts and shared secrets, couldn't turn her away. "I'll come," I said, "but on one condition. No more pretending. No more using me when it's convenient. If I'm going to do this, we do it together. Honestly." "Okay," she breathed. "Together." When I stepped off the train back in Yorkshire, the air tasted like old ghosts and lavender. The hydrangeas were wilted, petals browning around the edges like they'd finally given up, pretending to bloom for a family that didn't deserve them. Mum met me at the door, her eyes wide with a gratitude she didn't know how to speak. "She's upstairs," she said, stepping aside. No hug, no warmth, just the same cold courtesy that had stitched our lives together for so long. Eloise was propped up in bed, her face pale and pinched. She looked smaller than ever, her hands trembling against the sheets. But when she saw me, her eyes lit up like they used to when we were little girls sneaking extra biscuits from the tin. "May," she whispered, "you came." I sat beside her, careful not to jostle the tubes snaking out of her arm. Of course I did. We talked for hours, our voices low and tangled with memories. She told me about the nights she'd lie awake listening for my footsteps in the hallway, about the guilt that bloomed every time she watched Mum and Dad turn their backs on me. I told her about London, the cracked walls, the stale tea, the quiet ache of living alone but not lonely. "I want to fix this," she said. "Us. Not just for now, for real." "Then stop letting them speak for you," I said. "Start standing up for what you want, for who you love." She reached for my hand, her palm clammy but warm. "Stay," she murmured. "Just for a while." So I stayed. Days blurred into nights, the house shifting around us like a wounded animal. Mum cooked dinners she never sat down to eat. Dad hovered in doorways, watching us like he couldn't decide if he belonged in the room or not. But Eloise and I, we were a small, stubborn sun in that cold house, orbiting each other for warmth. One night, I woke to find her sitting in the armchair by my old bed. The moonlight carved hollows in her cheeks, shadows deep under her eyes. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She shook her head. "I keep thinking if this doesn't work, if I don't make it." "Don't." I cut her off, my throat tight. "Don't talk like that." "But I have to," she said, her voice trembling. "I have to know you'll be okay. That you'll go on and live, really live. Not just for me, but for you." I sat up, my scar throbbing under my fingertips. "I don't know if I can." She smiled. Tired, but true. "You can. You're stronger than any of us. You always were." I reached for her hand, our fingers knotting together in the dark. "Promise me you'll fight," I whispered. "Promise me you'll let go," she shot back. "Of them, of all this. Find something that's yours. Someone who loves you because you're Malin, not because they need you to save them." Her eyes fluttered shut, her breathing evening out, as sleep finally claimed her. I sat there long after she drifted off, her words echoing in my chest like a heartbeat I'd almost forgotten how to feel. Down the hall, I heard Mum and Dad arguing in hushed voices. The same tired script they'd been performing my whole life. I didn't get up to listen. Their words didn't matter anymore. Not here. Not now. I looked at Eloise, my brave, broken sister, and realized that maybe this time, the only one who could save me was me. The nights in that house felt longer than the days. Every hour crawled over my skin like a ghost of the years I'd spent here, wishing I could be anywhere else. But this time, I didn't run. I sat with Eloise through the restless dark, listening to her shallow breathing, feeling the tremor in her fingers when the pain woke her. We talked about nothing and everything, the way we used to whisper secrets as kids under blankets, trying to drown out the sound of our parents' arguments. Sometimes she drifted off mid-sentence, her words trailing into dreams I couldn't follow. When she slept, I'd slip out to the garden, barefoot on the cold stone path, the hydrangeas drooping like they were exhausted by the charade too. I'd smoke the occasional cigarette, I'd bummed off the night nurse, the glow of it, a tiny rebellion in the dark. Mum pretended not to notice. She'd leave tea outside my door every morning. Too much milk, too sweet, the way I hated it. But she never asked how I was. She didn't know how. Maybe she never would. Dad kept his distance, but I'd catch him watching me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. Like he was trying to find the daughter he'd thrown away in the lines of my face. Like he wanted to say something he couldn't unbury from his chest. The doctors came and went, white coats rustling like whispers. They poked and prodded, spoke in careful, measured tones, their eyes flicking to me like I was part of the prognosis. They wanted more tests. Always more tests. More blood. More scans. More of me. One morning, they found fluid building up around Eloise's lungs. I stood outside her room while they wheeled her down for another procedure. Mom sat on the hallway bench, her hands clutched in her lap, knuckles pale as bone. Dad hovered by the window, his back stiff, his reflection ghosted in the glass. No one spoke. The silence was a bruise we all kept pressing. When Eloise came back, she looked smaller than ever. The spark in her eyes dimmed, but it didn't go out. "I hate hospitals," she rasped, her voice raw from the tube they'd pushed down her throat. "Me too," I said, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. "Next time, let's just not." She laughed, a wheezy, broken sound that still somehow made me smile. "Deal." I sat with her through the afternoon, the sky outside shifting from sullen gray to a bruised purple dusk. She dozed off, her hand slack in mine, the beep of the machines counting out each moment she stayed. Mum poked her head in once, her eyes skimming over me like I was furniture. "You should get some rest," she said. "You look tired." I bit back a laugh. Tired. The word felt too small for what I was. "I'm fine," I said. "Go home, Mum. Sleep." She didn't argue. She never did when the subject was me. Late that night, after the nurses did their rounds and the corridors fell quiet, Eloise stirred. "May," she whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Promise me something. Anything." Her eyes glistened in the low light. "Promise me you won't disappear when I'm gone." A blade of panic sliced through me. "Don't talk like that." "I need you to hear me," she insisted, her fingers tightening around mine with a strength that shocked me. "You gave me your kidney, your love, your time. But don't give me your life. When I'm gone, and May, if that happens, promise me you'll live. Really live. Find a home that feels like home. Love someone who loves you because you're you, not because they need saving." My throat closed up. I wanted to tell her she'd make it, that the doctors would find a way, that we'd beat this. But lies tasted worse than truth. "I promise," I whispered. "But you have to promise me you'll keep fighting." She smiled, small and tired. "Deal." She drifted off again, her breathing shallow but steady. I sat there, tracing circles on her palm with my thumb, willing my promise into her bones. In the days that followed, the house turned into a station. Relatives and neighbors stopping by to hover in doorways, their condolences half-formed, their eyes flitting from Eloise to me like they couldn't figure out how I fit into this tragedy. The perfect daughter and the spare part. The biggest mistake turned last hope. One afternoon, Mum found me in the kitchen, hunched over a mug of cold tea. She stood there for a long time, like she was waiting for permission to speak. "Why are you really here, Malin?" she asked finally. I looked up, the bitterness rising in my throat like bile. "Because your perfect daughter needs me. Isn't that always the reason?" Her face twisted, but she didn't deny it. "You could have said no." "Could I?" I snapped. "You'd have watched me walk away and blamed me for her dying. You'd have folded that into your story about how I ruined everything." Mum flinched, but the mask slipped back into place so fast I wondered if I'd imagined it. "You don't have to stay." "But I do," I said, "because I promised her. Not you, not Dad, her." Mum's eyes flicked to the floor. For a heartbeat, I saw the woman she might have been. The one who held me when I was 5 and had nightmares. The one who brushed my hair and kissed my scraped knees. Then the door slammed shut behind her eyes again, and she left without another word. One night, Eloise and I lay side by side in her bed, like when we were little. The machines hummed around us, But for once, they felt more like background noise than a sentence. "Do you remember that summer," she murmured, her eyes half closed, "when we made that fort under the old oak tree?" I laughed softly. "You made me swear not to tell Mum you stole her sheets." She grinned, a ghost of the girl she'd been. "You kept that secret." "I kept a lot of secrets," I said. Her smile faded. "I know. I wish I'd kept more for you." We fell asleep like that, the past curling around us like a blanket that didn't quite fit anymore. Morning came, pale and uncertain. The doctors spoke in low voices outside her room. Dad stood with his head in his hands, shoulders hunched like he'd finally realized he couldn't control this narrative. When Eloise woke, her eyes were clear. "Go home for a bit," she told me. "Rest, shower, eat something that doesn't taste like hospital." I wanted to argue, but the look she gave me told me she needed this, so I kissed her forehead, smoothed her hair back, and slipped out. At my flat, the quiet was suffocating. I showered, scrubbing the hospital smell from my skin until it turned pink. I lay on the couch, the ceiling a blank page I couldn't fill. My phone buzzed, Eloise's name lighting up the screen, a single message. "I love you, always." I called her back, but she didn't pick up. Panic dug into my chest. I threw on the first clothes I could find and ran for the train, the world outside the window a smear of green and gray. When I arrived, the house was too quiet. Mum was in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes dry like the well had run out. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice breaking. Mum didn't answer. She didn't have to. I pushed past her, up the stairs 2 at a time. Eloise lay there, still and small, her chest rising and falling so slowly I thought I'd imagined it. I fell to my knees by her bed, grabbing her hand. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here, Elo." Her eyes fluttered open, a weak smile playing at her lips. "I knew you'd come back." I pressed my forehead to her hand, our skin warm with shared heat. "Don't go," I begged. "Please." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The machines beeped in that terrible steady way that told me time was slipping, no matter how tight I held on. I stayed there through the night, humming old songs we'd made up as children, songs about forts under oak trees and secrets no one could take away. And when the dawn crept in, I felt her slip like a breath, like a promise kept and broken all at once. When Mum came in, she found me curled around what was left of my sister, our hands still knotted together. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The wind chased me back into the city that night, the skyline gleaming like a crown I'd carved out of every no and never I'd swallowed over the years. My mind should have been tired. My bones certainly were, but the fire under my ribs refused to burn out. Not when Clarissa was still out there, coiling her poison around the things I'd built. Freya met me at the office just before midnight. She'd changed out of her gala dress into leggings and an old jumper, her hair scraped into a bun so tight it made her eyes look wider, sharper. She handed me a takeaway coffee. "You should be asleep," she said. "So should you," I shot back. But the corner of her mouth twitched. We both knew sleep was a luxury for people who didn't grow up feeling the floorboards shake when overdue notices hit the mat. She gestured to the whiteboard she'd dragged into my corner office. "I've mapped everything. The donation shortfall, the Shell account trail, the press statements you've approved. But the big problem now is your sister's meeting with Calton and Crow." Just hearing that name made my fingers curl into fists. Calton and Crow, the consultancy that had tried to poach my biggest contract 2 years ago. A syndicate of old money fixers who'd made their fortune off the backs of people like me. Clarissa sitting at their table meant only one thing. She was ready to sell me out to the highest bidder. "What do they want?" I asked. Freya's eyes glimmered under the harsh office lights. "You. Or rather, the story of your downfall. Calton and Crow thrive on acquiring distressed projects. They'll spin you as unstable, the charity as a vanity project, run into the ground by your poor management. Then they'll rescue the foundation, rename it, gut it, siphon the press credit while the programs rot." She'd destroy her own sister to save face, I murmured. Lore, Freya said gently. She already is. I sank into the cracked leather chair that had once belonged to my mentor. The only man who'd ever told me my silence wasn't weakness, but a strategy waiting for the right moment to roar. I let my head drop into my hands, feeling the pulse of a headache bloom behind my eyes. Freya crouched beside me, her voice soft but steel-edged. Tell me what you need. We'll do it. I let the silence stretch, let the bitterness gather at the back of my throat until it tasted like resolve. I need to beat her at her own game. Freya's grin was savage. Then let's start. By dawn, we'd dug up every whisper Clarissa had buried under manicured smiles and family secrets. Offshore accounts in her husband's name. Donations that had never landed in any real ledger. Rumors she'd fed to influencers she thought were loyal but who'd turned on her the second they realized the scent of scandal sold better than pity. At 6, Ben arrived, pale and bleary-eyed, but clutching a flash drive like it was a lifeline. It's all here, he said, voice rough. Every email she ever sent from the personal account she thought was private. I opened one at random. Don't worry about Lorelei. She's always been easy to control. She wants people to like her too much to push back. Asterisk. Freya read over my shoulder. She really thought you'd keep carrying her, didn't she? She never saw me coming, I said, because she never saw me at all. When the sun cracked open the morning sky, I changed into a crisp suit. Not black, not navy, but white. A declaration that I wasn't here to blend in anymore. I wasn't here to be a shadow in Clarissa's story. We called the board back in for an emergency session. Simon Worthington was there again. This time less skeptical, more curious. He greeted me with a nod that was half challenge, half salute. I didn't bother sitting at the head of the table. I stood at the whiteboard, Ben pulling up the slides I'd stayed up all night creating. Timelines, account trails, digital receipts. Each line drew a noose Clarissa had tied around her own neck. You're going to leak this? Simon asked when I finished. Publicly? Not yet, I said. I'm going to give her a choice first. Freya tilted her head. Mercy? No, I said, and the word tasted like freedom. Control. I dialed Clarissa's number right there in the boardroom. It rang once, twice, and then her voice. All silk and poison. Lore, finally ready to apologize? I laughed, and the sound echoed in the marble silence. Not quite. We both know you don't care about the money. You care about the story. You care about being the hero of the narrative where your tragic little sister fell apart without you. You should be careful, she said, her voice cold now. You don't know who you're playing with. Don't I? I asked. Here's my offer, Clarissa. You withdraw your statements, you issue a public retraction admitting you lied, and you disappear from my foundation. You want to be a socialite? Fine. Be one somewhere else. Silence. Then a hiss. Or what? I flicked my hand at Ben, who projected the file to the boardroom screen. Her emails, her offshore holdings, her quote charity donations that never reached the programs they were meant for. Or this goes public, and you drown in your own spin. She tried to laugh, a brittle glass-cracking sound. They'll never believe you. They don't have to, I said. They'll believe the bank statements. Another pause. I could hear her breath, short and ragged. For the first time since we were children, Clarissa sounded small. You wouldn't, she whispered. Try me, I said. You have until midnight. After that, it's done. I ended the call before she could answer. Simon let out a low whistle. You really think she'll walk away? I think, I said, she'll finally understand what it means to stand alone. Freya caught my eye, her grin wolfish. So what happens now? I leaned against the boardroom table, the weight of years sliding off my shoulders like an old coat. Now, I said, we wait for her to beg. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. Clarissa had always been a master of the slow bleed, drip-feeding attention, guilt, apologies that sounded like compliments but tasted like poison. But this time, the silence was hers to hold, not mine. Freya made me go home. She practically shoved me into a car, ignoring my protests. "You're no good to anyone half dead on your feet," she said. "Rest. If she calls, I'll be the first to know." So I went back to my flat. My flat, not hers, not our parents', mine, the place I'd bought with the first real money I'd earned. I stood in the doorway for a long time, letting the quiet settle into my bones like a reminder. No one else's name was on the deed. No one else's fingerprints on the life I'd built here. I slept for 3 hours, then woke with my heart pounding. My phone lay silent on the bedside table, its blank screen more terrifying than any threat. I made tea in the dark. The kettle's hiss louder than my thoughts. By noon, I was back at the office. Ben had set up camp in the break room, eyes bloodshot, tie long since abandoned. Freya was at her usual spot by the whiteboard, updating the timeline of Clarissa's mess with red marker circles that bled across the months. "Nothing yet?" I asked. Freya shook her head. "She's stalling." Ben spoke up from behind his laptop. "Or she's trying to lawyer up and spin it." "She can't spin bank records," I said. "She can't spin trust documents." Freya capped the marker and turned to me. "She can spin you, though. If she drags your name through the mud one more time. The sister who bullied her. The sister who's so power-hungry. She'd frame her own family. You know they'll eat it up." "Let them try," I said. "I won't hide anymore." But the truth was, I felt the edge of the old fear creeping in. The fear that no matter how hard I'd fought, how high I'd climbed, the world would always believe her version before it believed mine. Because she made cruelty look like charm. She always had. By 5, the press was sniffing at the edges. My phone buzzed with requests for comment. Freya intercepted each one like a hawk, her responses clipped and bulletproof. "Miss Shaw stands by her statement. All records will be made public if necessary." At 7, my mother called. "Lore," she said, her voice small through the static. Clarissa came by. I closed my eyes. What did she want? "She says you're trying to ruin her, that you forged things, that you've always been jealous." Mom's voice cracked. I didn't know what to say. My throat went tight. "You didn't have to say anything, Mom. It's not your fight." "But you're my girls," she whispered. "Both of you." I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. My face pale and hollow, the city a smear of gold behind me. "One of us stopped acting like your girl a long time ago," I said, softer than I meant to. She didn't argue. She never did when it came to Clarissa. Maybe that was the problem. When I hung up, Freya stood there, arms crossed. "We push now, Lorelei, before she can rally. We get ahead of it." "How?" She turned her laptop toward me. "We do what she hates most. We tell the truth. You sit down with the right journalist, one who won't twist your words. We show the records. We make it clear this is about saving the charity, not revenge." "She'll spin it as revenge anyway," I said. Freya shrugged. "So what? Let her. But the public will see the paper trail. She'll drown in her own words." I felt the old doubt curl around my ribs. I thought of the nights Clarissa and I used to sneak out of the house as teenagers, sitting on the roof with our knees touching, whispering about the futures we'd carve. I thought of how she'd always been able to twist a knife and make it feel like a gift. "Are you ready?" Freya asked, her voice so soft it broke something loose inside me. I swallowed hard. "Book it." She did. Within hours, she had a meeting lined up with a journalist I trusted. A woman named Naomi, who'd once covered a story about our foundation's youth shelter without asking for a single staged photo. Naomi understood truth when she saw it. The interview was set for the next morning. I went home again, but sleep was impossible. I lay on my sofa, the city humming outside my window, the ghost of my sister's laughter drifting through my head. At dawn, Freya picked me up. She drove in silence, her hand resting on the gear stick like she was daring the world to try us one more time. Naomi met us at a cafe near the river. Somewhere neutral, quiet, the kind of place where confessions felt more like conversations. She greeted me with a hug I didn't know I needed. "You don't owe me anything you're not ready to say," she said gently. "But I think you're ready." I was. I told her everything. I told her about the shell accounts, the fake donations, the lies spread like seeds in a garden Clarissa had always believed she'd harvest alone. I told her about the bus stop in the rain, the bakery job, the lectures by candlelight because I couldn't pay the electric. I told her about my father's steelworker hands and my mother's quiet pride, and the way I'd tried to carry all of them on my shoulders. Naomi didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, she closed her notebook and said, "They'll come for you when this runs." "I know," I said. "Let them." The piece went live that evening. A bomb dropped in the middle of a dinner hour. Clarissa probably spent rehearsing her next lie. By the time I turned off my phone, the comment sections were already burning. Some people called me brave. Some called me foolish. But for the first time, no one was calling me invisible. Freya stayed at my flat that night. We sat on my kitchen floor, drinking wine straight from the bottle, our backs pressed to the cupboards. Maple, my rescue mutt, more loyal than any human I'd ever met, curled at my feet. "She'll come back harder," Freya said. "You know that, right?" I looked at her. This woman who'd once just been an assistant, but had become something closer to family than my own blood. "Let her come," I said. "I've got you. I've got the truth. I've got me." Freya clinked her bottle against mine. "To the truth, then." I closed my eyes, let the wine burn its way through the hollow places Clarissa had left behind, and whispered into the dark. "To the truth." The morning after the interview broke felt like waking up in a different version of my own life. One where the shadows I'd been hiding in were replaced by floodlights I hadn't asked for but refused to flinch from. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Reporters wanting statements, old schoolmates sending half-hearted messages that smelled of rubbernecking, donors either offering quiet reassurance or panicked silence. Freya and Ben met me at the office before dawn. They'd set up what looked like a war room, whiteboards filled with names and arrows, timelines of Clarissa's lies, folders stacked like bricks ready to wall off the worst of what might come next. Freya thrust a coffee into my hand. "She's been calling," she said without preamble. "Clarissa?" "She's left 4 voicemails so far. She wants a meeting. Wants to talk like sisters," Freya said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "And before you even ask, yes, she's also been calling Simon Worthington." And half the board, Ben, who looked like he hadn't slept in days, lifted his head from his laptop. "Lore, you need to hear this." He hit play on the first voicemail. Clarissa's voice spilled into the room, low, sugar-sweet, and razor-sharp underneath. Asterisk. "Lore, darling, I think you've misunderstood. All of this has gotten so messy. Let's sit down. You know I only ever wanted what's best for you. Asterisk." Freya snorted. "Best for you or best for her image?" I shook my head. "She doesn't want a conversation. She wants damage control." Ben frowned. "You'll meet her though, right? For optics, if nothing else." I leaned back against the window, the city waking behind me, my reflection layered over glass towers I'd once only dreamed of stepping foot inside. "Yes," I said finally, "but on my terms. Not hers." Freya's mouth curled. "Then make her come here. To the office. Let her sit in the house you built while she tries to spin her lies one more time." And that's exactly what we did. At noon sharp, Clarissa arrived. Flanked by her lawyer, a smug man in an overpriced suit, who carried himself like he thought everyone in the room should be grateful for his presence. Clarissa swept into my office like she owned the air in it, her perfume cloying, her smile tight enough to crack porcelain. "Lore," she said, arms outstretched. You look exhausted. I didn't move to hug her. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit down, Clarissa. Freya lingered by the door, arms folded, eyes sharp. Ben stood just behind me, laptop open, recording every second. Clarissa's lawyer started immediately. Miss Shaw, my client would like to discuss the possibility of a joint statement. She feels the narrative has become unnecessarily hostile and would prefer to present a united family front. I raised an eyebrow. A united family front? After the smear campaign? The shell donations? The whispers to Cailton and Crow? Clarissa's eyes darted away for the briefest flicker of a moment before she caught herself. Lore, this is all a misunderstanding. You're letting these people, she gestured at Freya and Ben with a dismissive wave, put ideas in your head. Freya laughed under her breath. Better than letting you poison it. Clarissa bristled. Watch your tone, dear. I leaned forward. No. You watch yours. Here's how this goes. You issue a public statement admitting you lied. You sever all ties with the foundation, permanently. You drop the trust claim you've been whispering to your husband's lawyers, and you stay out of my way. Her jaw tightened, the mask slipping just enough for the real fury underneath to gleam through. And if I don't? Ben clicked a folder open on his screen. Page after page of bank transfers, offshore statements, and emails. He turned the laptop to face her lawyer. Then this goes public, with timestamps, signatures, the whole rotten trail. Clarissa's lawyer cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Miss Shaw, you should consider the optics. Clarissa's fingers dug into the armrests, knuckles white. You think they'll believe you over me? I am this family's face. You're just... Just what? I cut in. Just the girl you thought would always be small enough to control? You're right. I was. But look around, Clarissa. Look at these walls. Look at these people. You're sitting in my empire. Not yours. Mine. She opened her mouth, but the words withered on her tongue. I stood. You have 24 hours. Clear your name, or I'll clear it for you. In court, in the press, in every boardroom you've ever tiptoed into on my back. Freya stepped forward, voice cold as ice. Meeting's over. Clarissa rose, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. She ignored him, her eyes locked on mine. I made you, she spat. I didn't blink. No, you broke me. I made me. When the door slammed shut behind her, the silence was deafening. Then Freya let out a shaky laugh. Did you see her face? I wish I'd filmed it. Ben dropped into the nearest chair, scrubbing his hands over his face. She'll back down. She has to. But I wasn't so sure. Clarissa had always been the queen of the scorched earth. If she couldn't have the crown, she'd salt the fields to make sure no one else could plant hope there again. That night, the press camped outside my flat. I sat by the window, watching the cameras flash in the street below. Freya stayed over again, a blanket on my sofa, her laptop balanced on her knees as she drafted statements for every possible scenario. I lay awake, Clarissa's last words echoing in my head. I made you. I got up before dawn, pulled on my coat, and walked the city streets until my lungs burned. The old bus stop was still there, the same cracked pavement where I'd waited in the rain, 15 years old and full of dreams too big for my second-hand shoes. I stood there for a long time, letting the cold seep through my bones, letting the past slip out of my lungs with every exhale. When the sun rose, I turned back toward the tower that now carried my name on its corner sign. My feet felt steady. My chest felt light. Back in the lobby, Ben was waiting, eyes wide. Lore, it's Clarissa. She just posted a video. Freya appeared behind him, tablet in hand, her face pale. You need to see this. They played it for me right there. Clarissa, sitting in her marble kitchen, tears brimming at the corners of her eyes. Asterisk. I've made mistakes. I was trying to protect my family. Lorelei is my sister. I love her. I was misguided. Please respect our privacy while we heal from this together. Asterisk. Freya's jaw dropped. She's throwing herself a pity party. Ben's hands shook as he turned the screen toward me. Lore, what do you want to do? I stared at Clarissa's tear-streaked face. I saw the tiny glint of satisfaction in her eyes. The way she twisted the knife so that even her confession made her look like the wounded one. My hands clenched. Call Naomi, I said. Book another interview. She wants a war of stories? She's about to get it. Freya's smile was vicious. You're sure? This time, I said, my voice steel. I'm not just telling my story. I'm ending hers. It took 3 phone calls to reach Naomi, but when she finally answered, her voice was calm and sharp as ever. Tell me what you want, Lorelai. I didn't hesitate. I want the whole truth out. No more soft edges, no more shadows. I'm done letting Clarissa decide what the world gets to see. Naomi didn't miss a beat. My team can have cameras and lights set up in 2 hours. But once you say it, there's no putting it back in the box. You ready for that? I was born ready for that, I said. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a lie. I told myself to survive her. By the time we got to the studio, the waiting room was buzzing with a quiet tension I could almost taste. Freya sat at my side, flipping through her notes even though we both knew she wouldn't need them. Ben paced by the door, checking his phone every 5 seconds like he was waiting for Clarissa to burst in and drag me home by my hair like she used to threaten when I was small and stupid enough to believe her threats meant love. Naomi emerged from the other side of the glass, her expression softening when she saw me. You sure about this? She asked again. Press record before I lose my nerve, I said, though the truth was, the nerves were gone. There was just this bright, sharp calm, like the moment before a blade meets the knot. When the cameras rolled, I looked straight into the lens, the lights hot on my skin, my heartbeat steady. My name is Lorelai Shaw. I want to talk about my sister Clarissa and the truth she spent our whole lives trying to keep hers alone. I told them everything. No tears, no dramatics. Just the facts. The shell accounts, the fake donations, the trust money siphoned off like a leaking pipe no one wanted to notice. I talked about the charity, not as a vanity project, but as the lifeline I wished someone had thrown me when I was 15 and riding the bus home on a borrowed student card. I spoke about our father's hands, rough and cracked from the steelworks, and how he'd press coins into my palm for lunch I'd never buy because Clarissa always needed something more than I did. I told them how my mother used to say, family is everything, and how I'd spent 3 decades believing that family was a debt I'd never finish paying. Naomi's eyes glistened at one point, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she leaned forward, her voice low. What happens now, Lorelai? I looked straight into the lens, right through it, like I was talking to Clarissa alone in a dark kitchen at 3 in the morning when we were still sisters. What happens now? Now I built something she can't touch. Now I tell the world that every lie she spun about me only made me sharper, stronger. Now I remind every girl who's ever been told to stay small for someone else's comfort that she's allowed to be big, bigger than the ones who kept her in the shadows. Naomi ended the session with a quiet nod. I'll have the piece ready by tonight. Are you ready for what comes next? I squeezed her hand. It's the only thing I've ever been ready for. When we stepped back out into the cold dusk, the air smelled of rain. Freya draped her coat around my shoulders even though I hadn't asked. Clarissa's going to call you, she said. She already has, Ben cut in, waving his phone like a flag. 5 times. She's losing her mind. I smiled. Tired but real. Let her. That night, the interview hit every feed. My face, my voice, my words. They carried more weight than I'd ever thought I was allowed to hold. Clarissa responded within the hour. She released another video, all soft lighting and crocodile tears, begging for forgiveness. The comment section split open like a wound, half the world calling me brave, the other half saying I should have stayed quiet, kept the family's secrets buried. Freya sat beside me on my sofa, a glass of whiskey in her hand, Her laptop balanced on her knees as the likes, the reposts, the trolls all bled together in a torrent of noise. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I traced the rim of my glass, watching my reflection warp in the amber. No, not even a little. Somewhere around midnight, my phone buzzed again. A single word text. "Please." Clarissa. I stared at it so long my eyes blurred. Freya leaned over. "Don't answer. Not yet." But I did. I called her. Because I needed to hear the tremor in her voice. Because some masochistic part of me still wanted to believe there was a version of her buried under all the spite and spin who remembered being my sister. She answered on the first ring. "Lore, please. We can fix this. I'll do an interview. I'll tell them it was a misunderstanding. We can blame my husband, say he mismanaged the accounts. People will believe it." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me like dirty water. "No, Clarissa, they won't, and neither will I," she sobbed, a sound that once would have broken me. "You're destroying me, Lorelei." "No," I said, "you did that yourself. I'm just not carrying the pieces anymore." I hung up before she could spin another lie. Freya let out a breath she'd been holding. "You think she'll fight?" I stared out the window at the city lights flickering like stubborn hope. "She'll fight. But I'm not afraid of her anymore. And that's what terrifies her most." When dawn came, I stood at my window, phone buzzing nonstop, my reflection clear and steady in the glass. My empire was still standing. My name was still mine. And my sister? For the first time, she was the one outside looking in. This was the life she told her friends I'd never have. The one she said I was too poor, too plain, too spineless to claim. And yet, here I was. Here I am. And this story? It's nowhere near done. The morning after I turned the world right side up for myself, the city seemed quieter than usual. Or maybe it was me, quieter inside. I stood by the window, watching the sunrise smear gold across the skyline, thinking how even the ugliest stories can look soft when you stop seeing them through someone else's lens. Freya came over before I'd even finished my tea. She let herself in, she always did, juggling 2 phones, a fresh folder of crisis updates, and a bag of pastries she'd picked up from the bakery I used to work at as a teenager. "Breakfast," she said, dropping the bag on my table. "Power food for the new queen of charity scandal exposés." I laughed, soft but real. "I don't feel like a queen." "That's because you're not the type who needs a crown to prove you're ruling," she said. Anyway, Clarissa's response was worse than I expected. She pushed her phone across the table. "You need to see this." Clarissa's new video. Of course. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, no makeup this time, hair loose around her face like she thought it made her look soft, relatable. Her voice wavered as she talked about, quote, betrayal, about how families shouldn't air dirty laundry in public. She said I was unstable, that the charity money had been mismanaged but that she'd tried to fix it, quote, behind the scenes. She blamed her husband. She blamed her stress. She blamed me. Freya watched my face carefully. Do we hit back, or do we hold? I took a bite of pastry, the flaky sweetness melting on my tongue like an echo of a girl who used to hide behind a till, counting every penny twice. "We hold." "Are you sure?" Freya asked. "Yes," I said. "Let her drown in her performance. Every word she says makes people remember mine." The day blurred into calls, emails, more statements. Ben kept the board calm, the donors reassured. Simon Worthington sent an email late in the afternoon. Quote, "Impressive work. When this blows over, the foundation's reputation will be stronger than ever. You've done the impossible. Asterisk." I read his message twice, a warmth I didn't know I was craving settling in my chest. Not because I needed his approval, but because I knew I'd earned his respect without buying it. By nightfall, Freya dozed off on my couch. I sat beside her, scrolling through the headlines. Asterisk, Lorelei Shaw, how the family scandal made her stronger. Asterisk sister versus sister, the charity queen who wouldn't bow down. Asterisk. Some stories painted me the villain, the ice queen, the ruthless sister who cut family loose when it suited her. But I didn't care. Not anymore. The people who mattered, the families my charity served, the kids waiting on scholarship lists, the women who'd messaged me saying, asterisk, you made me feel like I can speak up too, asterisk. They were the only ones I'd answer to now. At 2 a.m, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Clarissa. Just a string of words, barely coherent. Asterisk, you win. You always wanted to win. I'm leaving the city. Congratulations. Asterisk, I read it 3 times. Once for the girl who used to dream of hearing those words. Once for the woman who no longer needed them. And once more, just to be sure I believed they were real. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. When Freya woke, she found me at my desk, scribbling plans on the back of an old envelope. You're working already? She said, voice thick with sleep. I'm planning, I said. I want to take the charity global. Scholarships, community centers. Not just the gala dinners and the photo ops, real work. Freya's grin was soft, proud. You've got the momentum. Use it. I intend to, I said. I want to show every kid like me that you don't have to stay small to keep other people comfortable. Freya leaned over and rested her forehead against mine. Then do it, and don't look back. A week later, Clarissa really did leave. Her husband stayed. Probably because he liked the house too much to follow her exile. There was no tearful goodbye, no sudden apology at the train station. Just a single headline. Socialite Clarissa Shaw steps back from public life. I didn't celebrate it. There was nothing to celebrate in seeing her break herself on the sword. She'd spent a lifetime swinging at my throat. When the dust settled, the board met one last time to sign off on the final transfer of power. Clarissa's name gone from every paper, every donor list, every hallway plaque she'd once insisted include her signature. It was all mine now, not because I'd bought it, but because I'd earned it when no one was watching. After the meeting, Freya and Ben sat with me in my new office. Bigger than the old one, brighter, with the city skyline spread out like a promise I'd no longer fear. Freya raised her glass. To you, the girl who never stopped showing up for herself, even when everyone else told her she should sit down and shut up, Ben added. And to the people you'll help now. I lifted my glass too, my hand steady. To the kids who'll stand taller than I ever did, and to every girl who knows she's more than someone else's afterthought. When they left, I sat alone in the quiet, the hum of the city outside my window. I pulled out my old notebook, the one I'd scribbled my first charity ideas in when I was 23 and working double shifts just to keep the lights on. I flipped to the back page. There, in messy, hopeful handwriting, was the line I'd written on a night I'd almost given up. One day they'll know I'm not my sister's shadow. Asterisk. I traced the words with my fingertip, a smile tugging at my lips. One day is now. And I'm just getting started. Spring arrived in Manchester like a promise I'd never let myself make before. The hydrangeas in my mother's tiny garden bloomed wild, blue, and stubborn, just the way Dad had liked them when he was alive. Some days I'd catch the scent of them drifting in through my office window and feel like he was still here. The ghost of his tired smile telling me I'd done enough. Except I hadn't. Not yet. The foundation, free of Clarissa's name and the rusted gears she'd jammed into every working part, started to breathe again. New donors stepped in. Not the glittering socialites she'd clung to like oxygen, but real people. The ones who knew what a warm meal felt like when you hadn't had one in 3 days. The people I'd built this for. One morning, Simon Worthington himself dropped by unannounced. He didn't come with a lecture or a veiled threat. Just 2 cups of coffee and a single file folder tucked under his arm. "May I?" he asked, nodding at the chair across from me. I gestured for him to sit. "You're the only one I'd let interrupt my Thursday spreadsheets." He chuckled, setting the folder on my desk. "I've watched a lot of people try to build empires, Lorelei. Some burn everything down just to feel the heat. But you built yours brick by brick while they laughed at your hands being dirty." I raised an eyebrow. "Flattery, Simon?" Not your style. He ignored that. What's next for you? I leaned back, staring out the window where the city sprawled wide and imperfect. We go international. Community centers in the places people forget. Not just pretty banquet halls with overpriced wine. Scholarships that don't come with strings attached. And a mentorship program for girls who hear they're not enough until they're too tired to prove otherwise. Simon's mouth twitched. Ambitious. I like it. Is that why you're here? I asked. To decide if I'm worth the gamble. No, he said. I'm here to say I'm in. As long as you stay exactly who you are. Before I could answer, Freya knocked and poked her head in. Sorry, Lore. We've got the local radio crew setting up in the lobby. They want a quote for the community garden launch. Simon stood, adjusting his cufflinks. You're in good hands, he said to her, like I wasn't even there. Freya shot him a grin. We know. When he left, she perched on the edge of my desk. You ready for tomorrow? I nodded. Tomorrow was the charity gala's 1-year anniversary, the same event Clarissa had tried to break me with. It felt like closing a circle I'd drawn with every scraped knuckle and every late-night bus ride home from meetings no one thought I'd ever belong in. Spring arrived in Manchester, like a promise I'd never let myself make before. The hydrangeas in my mother's tiny garden bloomed wild, blue, and stubborn, just the way Dad had liked them when he was alive. Some days, I'd catch the scent of them drifting in through my office window and feel like he was still here, the ghost of his tired smile telling me I'd done enough. Except I hadn't. Not yet. The foundation, free of Clarissa's name and the rusted gears she'd jammed into every working part, started to breathe again. New donors stepped in. Not the glittering socialites she'd clung to like oxygen, but real people, the ones who knew what a warm meal felt like when you hadn't had one in 3 days. The people I'd built this for. One morning, Simon Worthington himself dropped by unannounced. He didn't come with a lecture or a veiled threat, just 2 cups of coffee and a single file folder tucked under his arm. May I? He asked, nodding at the chair across from me. I gestured for him to sit. You're the only one I'd let interrupt my Thursday spreadsheets. He chuckled, setting the folder on my desk. I've watched a lot of people try to build empires, Lorelei. Some burn everything down just to feel the heat. But you built yours brick by brick while they laughed at your hands being dirty. I raised an eyebrow. Flattery, Simon? Not your style. He ignored that. What's next for you? I leaned back, staring out the window where the city sprawled wide and imperfect. We go international. Community centers in the places people forget, not just pretty banquet halls with overpriced wine, scholarships that don't come with strings attached, and a mentorship program for girls who hear they're not enough until they're too tired to prove otherwise. Simon's mouth twitched. Ambitious. I like it. Is that why you're here? I asked. To decide if I'm worth the gamble? No, he said. I'm here to say I'm in, as long as you stay exactly who you are. Before I could answer, Freya knocked and poked her head in. Sorry, Lore. We've got the local radio crew setting up in the lobby. They want a quote for the community garden launch. Simon stood, adjusting his cufflinks. You're in good hands, he said to her, like I wasn't even there. Freya shot him a grin. We know. When he left, she perched on the edge of my desk. You ready for tomorrow? I nodded. Tomorrow was the charity gala's 1-year anniversary. The same event Clarissa had tried to break me with. It felt like closing a circle I'd drawn, with every scraped knuckle and every late-night bus ride home from meetings no one thought I'd ever belong in. The night before, I stood in Mum's kitchen, nursing a cup of too strong tea while she fussed with her old kettle. You'll wear that blue dress, won't you? She asked. I raised an eyebrow. You hate that dress. She smiled, soft and tired but proud. Your father loved it. Said you looked like the kind of woman who doesn't say sorry for taking up space. I felt the sting behind my eyes, but didn't let it fall. Then I'll wear it. The gala was smaller than last year's, on purpose. No marble ballrooms, no chandeliers that cost more than my childhood home. We held it in the new community hall our donors had helped build, the same one where kids now had art classes and free lunches, and mothers could come to talk about things they never got to say at home. Freya stood at my side when I took the mic, her hand squeezing mine until my fingers ached. I told them the story, the one I'd spent a lifetime hiding. The girl who used to skip meals so her sister could wear nicer shoes. The woman who'd learned that some family ties are not meant to be untied, even if it breaks your hands to do it. They applauded, not because I'd made them feel good, but because they saw themselves in every word. After, I found Freya in the back hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. She caught my eye, rolling hers dramatically. Ben wants to know if you're actually coming to the team after party, or if you're going to sneak off and brood on a rooftop somewhere like Batman. I laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing down the painted concrete walls. Tell him I'm coming. No more rooftops, no more shadows. When I stepped outside for a breath of air, I saw a lone figure leaning against the fence by the garden beds. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be Clarissa, some final ghost sent to ruin the last page of this chapter. But it was Mum, her coat too thin for the chill, her eyes soft under the security lights. "I'm proud of you, Lorelei," she said, her voice trembling. "I wish I'd been stronger for you both." I didn't argue. Some things didn't need to be rewritten, only accepted. I hugged her, smelling her lavender soap, her warmth. "You did your best. I'm doing mine. That's enough." Back inside, Freya handed me a glass of cheap bubbly. Ben raised his in mock salute. "To the girl who never stopped fighting. And to the next fight." I clinked mine against theirs, the fizz catching in my throat, the taste sweeter than any vintage champagne could ever be. When I went home that night, my home, my name on the door, I found a single envelope slipped under it, no return address, just my name, looping and familiar. Inside was a photo of Clarissa and me, maybe 12 and 16, sitting on the roof of our old house. Our arms were slung around each other's shoulders, eyes squinting against the sun. On the back, in her careful practice script, she'd written, "I hope you're happy now. I really do. Asterisk. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was one last manipulation. I'd never know. And maybe that was okay." I tucked it into the back of my notebook, the same one that held my first plans for this foundation, a reminder that history doesn't disappear. It grows roots, wild and stubborn, just like hydrangeas in the city air. I stood at my window, the skyline glittering like a life I'd chosen, piece by imperfect piece. And I whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Clarissa, for making me strong enough to become the girl you never thought I could be." The city breathed back, quiet but steady, waiting for whatever came next. So was I. Summer stretched over Manchester like a soft promise. Some days, when I walked past the garden beds behind our new community hall, I caught a glimpse of the girl I used to be, standing under the floodlights, counting the change in her pocket, praying it would be enough. But now she was holding a clipboard, greeting volunteers, laughing too loud because she finally could. The anniversary of the gala came and went with no ghostly surprises. Clarissa stayed gone, her name washed off our donor plaques, her voice no longer leaking poison into my foundation's veins. Rumors drifted in sometimes that she'd remarried, that she was living somewhere warm, still telling anyone who'd listen that I was the mistake she'd been forced to carry for too long. Let her. Her story was hers to rot in. Mine kept growing. Freya became more than my right hand. She was the pulse that reminded me not to retreat, when old fears whispered I should. Ben rose from assistant to director of operations, his spreadsheets more vital to our expansion than any flowery speech I could give. Together, the three of us built rooms where no one had to feel small just to make someone else comfortable. One night, I found myself standing at a new project site, a women's shelter we'd funded on the rougher side of town. The old warehouse we'd bought smelled like damp concrete and lost hope, but I could already see it painted bright, windows thrown open to let the air in. I imagined the laughter that would fill its halls, the children who'd never have to wait at a bus stop alone in the rain. Freya joined me, blueprint in hand, a streak of dust on her cheek. "You look like you're thinking too much," she teased. "Not too much," I said. "Just enough." She tapped the paper. "We'll have a reading room here and a play space here. We can name them, you know, for the donors." I laughed. "Or maybe we name them for the kids who never had their names on anything before." Freya's grin split wide. "God, I love you." "I know," I said, my heart light. On the night of the shelter's opening, Mum came. She walked through the halls, her hand brushing the fresh paint, eyes glassy with memories I knew she'd never share out loud. When we stood in the main room, the kids playing tag under the string lights, she turned to me and said, "Your father would have called this a miracle." "He would have called it hard work," I said. "The miracle is that I didn't stop when it hurt." We hugged, quiet and long, letting go of every apology neither of us could ever quite say. In the months that followed, the press came and went. They wanted the redemption arc, the sister scandal, the photo of me staring stoically out a rain-streaked window. But I gave them something better, proof that survival doesn't have to be bitter to bloom. The kids we funded graduated and sent me photos in their caps and gowns. The mothers we sheltered brought flowers from gardens they'd planted in soil they'd once thought too rocky to take seed. And through it all, Clarissa stayed gone. Sometimes I'd get a letter, never signed, but I knew the script. Asterisk, "You win, you always did, I hope you're happy." I never answered. Some ghosts deserve to fade. On the last day of that year, we hosted a gathering in the new hall. Not a gala, no silver cutlery, no forced smiles. Just families, food, laughter that spilled out into the cold night air. Freya found me by the door, arms crossed, eyes soft. "You know," she said, "it's funny. Your sister told the world you were poor so they'd laugh at you. But the only reason this all works is because you know what poor feels like." "Maybe," I said, watching a young girl braid her mother's hair by the fire pit. "Or maybe it's because I stopped caring what the rich think they know about people like me." Freya raised her plastic cup. "To you, Lorelei Shaw, the girl who turned someone's worst insult into the reason hundreds of people get to stand taller." Then added, "And to every sister who outgrows her shadow." I lifted my cup with theirs. No crown, no stage, just a promise. When everyone left, I lingered in the hall, sweeping crumbs into my palm, my feet bare on the polished floor. I sat on the stage, the same way I had when I was 15, dreaming of something bigger than my sister's permission. I pulled my old notebook from my bag, the one that still held my first ideas, the list scribbled in borrowed pens. In the back was a line I'd added only months ago. "Being someone's biggest mistake is better than living as their smallest success." Asterisk. Outside, the city lights flickered like a heartbeat. The bus stop where it all began was still there, cracked and battered but standing. Just like me. I whispered into the dark. "Thank you for leaving me in the rain, Clarissa. Thank you for showing me how to build a home from the ruin." And the wind carried it away. Not as a wish, but as a truth too strong to bury. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.